Hello, welcome to Novara Live. I'm Bastani. Tonight I'm joined down the line by Stephen Methven. Stephen, how are we?
Good evening, Aaron. I'm very good. I'm taking a short break from the big smoke and I'm staying with some friends down in Hastings, getting a bit of fresh air and autumnal breezes.
Coming up tonight, a new report from the think tank Commonwealth reveals the scale of the damage done to Britain by privatisation. Even more Tories have defected to reform, and Keir Starmer agreed to an emergency debate on the Epstein-Mandelson scandal and then, surprise, surprise, didn't bother showing up. But first, I have a question. Do you get the cortado? And no, I don't mean the coffee. It's our most popular newsletter sent out each and every Friday morning. Ash Sarkar is usually at the wheel, but this Friday, our very own Harriet Williamson will be giving you her freshest take of the week, getting you ready for Saturday. Don't miss out. Get it straight into your inbox by signing up at Novara Media/The Cortado. Do it right now. Open that other tab. There we go. The United Nations has definitively ruled that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory has released a landmark 72-page report confirming what many international human rights organisations have been saying for months. Here's UN Commission Chair Nav Pillay.
The Commission finds it is genocide. In our report, the Commission found that the Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces committed and are continuing to commit the following underlying acts of genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
To reiterate, the Commission found that 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined under international law have been carried out by the State of Israel since October 2023. These acts include some of the very worst crimes human beings can inflict upon one another: direct attacks on civilians, severe mistreatment of detainees, forced displacement, destruction of medical services, the blocking of food, water and fuel, reproductive violence, and the direct targeting of children. Here's an excerpt from the report. In relation to the attacks along the evacuation routes and within designated safe areas, the Commission found that the Israeli security forces had clear knowledge of the presence of Palestinian civilians, including children. Nevertheless, Israeli security forces shot at and killed civilians, including children who were holding makeshift white flags. Some children, including toddlers, were shot in the head by snipers. Let me read that again. Some children, including toddlers, kids as young as 2 and 3, were shot on purpose in the head by trained snipers. A country shooting toddlers in the face receives material support in the form primarily, but not exclusively, of aerial reconnaissance from the British government. The red carpet is rolled out for the ambassador, prime minister, and president of that country, whose snipers are killing kids, shooting toddlers in the head. But if you think that's depraved, you're a bad person. If you think that's morally repugnant, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite. If you go on the streets and protest about it, you'll be called all kinds of things, and actually some people even question your right to free speech. The 4th genocidal act, imposing measures intended to prevent births, refers to Israel's December 2023 attack on Gaza's largest fertility clinic. That destroyed thousands of embryos, sperm samples, and unfertilized eggs. The UN report is meticulously researched and uses Israeli politicians' and military leaders' own statements as part of the evidence for its conclusion. They're literally saying this stuff as evidence. Other people are saying, well, it's not true. Your guys literally said it. This hasn't stopped Israel from dismissing the report as based on Hamas lies. An Israeli military official called the report quite baseless and said this: "No other country has operated in these conditions and done so much to prevent harm to civilians on the battlefield." Israeli politician Fleur Hassan Nahum went on BBC News to say this:
I'm sorry, by no measure does that mean that this is genocide or intent of genocide. The goalposts have been moved. anything you can, anything they can to make this blood libel continue. And it is a blood libel in every single sense.
So we're talking about the documented murder by snipers of toddlers being shot in the head, but a UN body saying that, not me here at Novara Media, not maybe you watching, if you want to protest, hold a placard. Because, of course, with the little people, we can be called anti-Semites by the elite and the establishment. A literal UN report made by a very formidable body on the global stage, even those people, when talking about the most heinous of human crimes, I think, will be accused of blood libel by these people. Here's former US Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, appearing on Politics Live.
I don't think anything coming out of the UN is significant at all. I think the UN has forfeited its right to be an arbiter, of international law because it picks and chooses who it favors. I think what's going on in Gaza is a tragedy, and I lay it 100% at the foot of Hamas and Iran, not at Israel.
That gentleman, by the way, Gordon Sondland, said in 2024 on MSNBC, I believe, that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were a bigger threat to democracy than the January 6 rioters who occupied the Capitol. I don't think any serious person thinks that. And yet he's being able to say this kind of nonsense on BBC Politics Live. You have to ask why. This was Labour MP Peter Swallow's response.
Look, genocide is a very specific and serious legal position. What I think is very obvious to see is that we are seeing utterly unacceptable acts going on in Gaza right now. We are seeing a man-made famine. We're seeing the bombardment of civilians. We're really struggling to get the aid in that we need, the hostages out that we need to get out. And ultimately, it's really important that the UK, working with its allies, the US and others, push as robustly as possible to get a ceasefire in place so we can start back onto the path of a two-state solution.
What the hell is this guy on about? We need a two-state solution. Israel is displacing, murdering, killing, maiming. There is a UN report talking about toddlers being shot in the head, and you're like, well, two-state solution. Maybe Israel is doing all of this stuff precisely so it doesn't have to have a two-state solution, because there won't be a nation of Palestine left, because the Palestinian people would have been genocided. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why they're hitting the biggest fertility clinic in Gaza. Today's report should be confirmation for whoever still needed it that a genocide is indeed taking place in the Gaza Strip. But the international community had obligations long before now. Here's UN Commissioner Chris Sidoti giving a timely reminder.
The most significant aspect of the interim orders of 26 January 2024 was that every country in the world was put on notice by the International Court of Justice that there was a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. And if it had not happened before that, it certainly happened then, that every country in the world became obliged under the law to take action, not to speak fine words, to take action to prevent genocide. There can be no doubt whatsoever that that obligation was activated on the 24th of January 2024, if not before.
Interestingly enough, that is the argument made by the government of Yemen, the Houthis, who are the government of Yemen. They control almost all the territory in that country. They say when they're attacking various boats in waters near Israel, when they're trying to basically reroute international shipping lanes away from that part of the world, around the Arabian Peninsula, away from the Suez Canal and whatnot, they say we're doing this precisely to stop a genocide, which we're compelled to do under international law. That same argument is now being repeated by very senior people. Very senior people. I know this is really hard to believe for the British media, but some brown people with some missiles in the Arabian Peninsula, who you don't even recognize as a legitimate government, are actually more compliant with international law than the people wearing suits in London and Washington. Makes you think. It should be clear to everyone watching that the UK has resoundingly failed in the duty that was just described. Former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn summed it up in a post on X. This genocide belongs to Britain too. The government's legacy will be its complicity in one of the greatest crimes of our time. We will never give up until there is justice, peace, and freedom for the Palestinian people. Now, as the UN Commission finds that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, Israel is ramping up its deadly bombardment of Gaza City. Gaza City is home to approximately 1 million people, and residents say they're being subjected to heavy and relentless attacks. Israeli bombs are demolishing tower blocks, and eyewitnesses say booby-trapped vehicles are being used by the IDF to destroy remaining residential homes. At least 78 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes since dawn. 78 in one day, today. Yesterday, Palestinian journalist Heb Jamal posted this on X. Gaza City is being erased as I type this. There are barely any journalists left to cover it. A mass Nakba of thousands of people is happening as we speak, and we have no idea how many have been killed or injured during Israel's annihilation campaign meant to occupy and ethnically cleanse. Horror. Again, it goes back to the point I was making earlier on. This is ethnic cleansing. Of course they're destroying residential buildings because they don't want Gazans to go back and live in them. And Jeremy Corbyn said this is one of the great crimes of our time. It's one of the great crimes of all time. If you think about the amount of munitions being used against the Gaza Strip, we've talked about this before, by weight, you're looking at all of the bombs used against Hamburg, Berlin, and London across the entirety of the Second World War, more than doubled by weight, has been dropped on Gaza since October 2023. And we've seen all of this, unlike in the 1940s, on our mobile phones, on TV screens, Instagram Reels, on X, YouTube. So I think it's up there with some of the greatest crimes of all time, precisely because we're complicit through knowing precisely what was happening. That wasn't the case 80 years ago. In scenes reminiscent of the 1948 Nakba, social media has been flooded with videos of Palestinians fleeing Gaza City over the past few days. Many families have now been displaced multiple times over the past 22 months. Israeli attacks have only worsened today. Gaza City resident Abu al-Abd Zakut said his cousin was cut in half by a concrete block, and they don't know how to retrieve her remains. Here he is, speaking to Reuters.
What did the children do for us to find a head here and a leg there? A body that's been thrown 20 meters? We've been bringing them out since 3 in the morning.
Pure hell. Pure hell. We talk about this story every single day here at Novara Media, more or less, because it is absolutely unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime. And our government is complicit. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz celebrated the destruction of Gaza City with a number of posts on X, including one that said, quote, Gaza is burning. Katz also shared this video. He had the caption, the Islamic University in Gaza is going up in smoke, eliminating the sources of incitement and terror, which of course goes back to the point made right at the top of this story. We're looking at genocide. How do you kill a people? How do you destroy a nation? Of course, you displace them, you murder them, you kill their young in particular, but you also have to destroy the means by which they can heal the sick, hospitals. You also have to eliminate the means by which they educate future generations, schools and universities. And of course, you have to target the means of literal reproduction. They've destroyed a fertility clinic too. Stephen, we talk about this story so much, but it does feel like all of this over the last 24 hours is confirmation of something really, really big and something really historic.
It is confirmation of that, but it's no confirmation that I think anybody really needed. I mean, I think one of the things that at Novara Media we should all be so incredibly proud of is the way that we have relentlessly and continuously covered the greatest crime of our lifetimes, as you said there, Aaron, something that we've never seen before. And anyone who's watched this show for nearly 2 years now will know that this is a genocide, but it'll have been obvious to them probably a year ago, if not longer, that this was a genocide. And we've said from the beginning, almost, that this is will be Israel's intention. So it is confirmation, but it's confirmation from a body that doesn't actually have any authority to do anything about it, or has given up any authority or pretense of authority to be able to do anything about it. It's not that it won't have impacts. It will be another thing that people can, wave in front of Keir Starmer or Yvette Cooper now as the Foreign Secretary and say, you're complicit in this. We've had yet further confirmation. But there's already been so much in the way of evidence of what's going on in Gaza that it's hard to see how this is actually going to change something, going to change, anything really. I'm not saying I'm sorry it's been done. I'm extremely glad that we have another body, one that used to be respected, no longer so much respected as you saw there from that American contributor. Used to be respected. So yeah, this is sort of confirmation of something, as I said, that we've known for a really long time. And what does the report say? Well, it says something that, again, was kind of clear from the ICJ, that the intent part of the crime, the mental act, as it's called, of intention is fairly visible in the statements of military leaders, of political leaders, of people occupying positions in Israeli civil society. And 4 out of 5 of the physical acts are present. The one that's not yet present is the transfer of children from the target group to another group. So, I think for me, the question is, what is it that has allowed this to continue, that prevents any action, any real action? I mean, people are starting to talk about, that surely there should be like military action here to prevent this genocide being carried out. Nothing like that's going to happen because sanctions aren't even happening. We're not even sanctioning Israeli companies, Israeli goods. We've barely managed to ban a few weapons export licenses. So why is it that there's this crazy, unprecedented ability for Israel as a state to get away with such an act of violence in broad daylight for the whole world to see? And there are a lot of answers to that question, but I think one thing that's very significant and very, very useful to look at is the framing of a so-called solution to the problem of Israel-Palestine, which is brought up all the time, and indeed was brought up by that Labour MP, whose name I can't remember and whose face I've never seen before, the two-state solution. What does the two-state solution do? Well, it creates this framework where at the very heart of it is the right of Israel as a state to exist. And the solution is the production somewhere of a Palestinian state at some point in time. And that promise of a Palestinian state, when the promise of an Israeli state has not only been met, but is incontrovertible, that promise of a Palestinian state gets dangled, it gets bargained with, it can be earned, but only if you cooperate in certain ways. It's a useful framework that not only, as it were, denies Palestinians the right to a state, which is already conceded to Israelis, but it also suggests that Palestinians don't deserve a state. And I think that framing is so ingrained in the way in which our political classes conceive of this issue, because Israel as an ally, there can be no question of its right to exist. Palestine as a kind of troublesome nation, or Palestinians as a troublesome nation for our ally, well, we can avoid any commitment to a Palestinian state, but it's a very, very useful bargaining tool, not necessarily to play with Palestinians, because I think many Palestinians do not believe Western governments when they talk about the two-state solution, but to play with domestic audiences, to keep domestic audiences sort of thinking, oh, well, if they haven't got a state yet, they must be doing something dodgy. But what never gets brought up is the question of Israel's right to exist. And as Francesca Albanese said last year, I think, no state has a right to exist. They just do exist or they don't exist. And we never question the idea of Israel's right to exist. And I don't mean the right of Israelis to exist or the right of Jews to exist. Of course not. Just like the actress Hannah Einbinder said on Sunday night at the Emmys, I'm very keen to separate Jewishness from the state of Israel, kind of ethno-state that's not representative of Jewish values or Jewish religion or custom in general. But the question of where the right to that state has, that we all accept to exist in the form that it currently has. And I think until we start asking that question, until we start asking a question about, okay, the nature of that state as one which can get away with committing genocide, which is so protected by the West, but is nonetheless this kind of rogue state, and the framing of the two-state solution kind of holding that constantly in place, unless we kind of get rid of that and think, okay, we need a new model for Israel, one that includes Palestinians in it, we're constantly going to let them sort of get away with this kind of behavior, which is going to go on for months now, because there isn't a conception yet that things could actually be different with Israel. It's always just a conception that things could be different with Palestinians. And actually, the source of this issue, the real source of it, is Israel. It's the country that's committing genocide. It's the country that's doing it with the complete cooperation of our government and other Western governments, most especially the US. So I think that is where the question has to start to go now. Less into that the ideal is a two-state solution, but more that the ideal is actually somehow changing the state of Israel so that something like this can never, ever happen again.
Yeah, I think that's right. Clearly, a necessary precursor to a two-state solution, if that's what you want. A necessary precursor, something which has to happen before there is a two-state solution, is for Britain to recognise the state of Palestine. It's a necessary precondition. But they don't want to do that because you're going to upset the Israelis. So while you have an Israeli political class thinking in terms of decades, even centuries, about a greater Israel, and demographically what Gaza, without Palestinians even in it, looks like, you have morons like this Labour MP talking about a two-state solution. It's just a holding position. They don't even mean it. They haven't, honestly, most of these people haven't even thought about it. And that's most establishment politics in this country. Well, of course, I believe in a two-state solution. It's like Tories that didn't want to leave the European Union, but they knew that the membership did before 2016. So they said, well, of course, we need to reform the European Union. It needs to be an intergovernmental organization where sovereign nation states collaborate rather than supranational. They use these big words you need A-levels in government and politics for, because they're lying to people. This is the take. This is the take you say to lie to people. That's what the two-state solution is, particularly for people on the centre-left. There's one comment I want to just say quickly in the chat. What's going on in Gaza is Stalingrad with 99% civilians. That's it. That's the formulation. That's exactly what is going on. Before we go to our next story, let me look at your super chats. We've got a thank you to Taraneh Ahmadi Parker. Taraneh, hope you're well. Regular super chatter, £4.99. Taraneh, let me know what you think. The public has paid almost £200 billion to those shareholders who own key British industries which have been privatised over the last 45 years. That's according to a new report published today by the think tank Commonwealth. In their analysis, titled Who Owns Britain, they charter the transfer of tens of billions of pounds to the owners of privatised water, rail, bus, energy and mail services. That report starts with this analysis. The country has been remade by a radical political project. From the late 1970s, privatisation has reshaped Britain, transforming public wealth into private power on an unprecedented scale. We live in the shadow of that unique experiment. No other G7 country privatised its essential services and infrastructure as much as Britain. In fact, since the 1980s, the only advanced economies that experienced a faster and deeper decline in gross public wealth than Britain were those affected by the, quote, shock therapy of the oligarchic and corrupt post-Soviet transition. It goes on to say this. Water, energy, transport, mail, parts of the care system, housing and land, to name everything that went from public hands to private control, is to state quite how profound the experiment has been. The results are now in. The verdict is damning. Our rivers and seas are polluted. Bus services are unreliable. Train infrastructure is starved of investment. Energy bills are crushing. The high cost of childcare forces parents to choose between staying in work and staying at home. Adult social care is eye-wateringly expensive. Millions are priced out of a secure home and pay more to their landlord than they keep for themselves. On that final point, paying more to a landlord than you keep yourself is not the norm, but lots of people have known it. I certainly have. Right? In my late 20s, I would be paying more to the landlord each week than I would be keeping of my paycheck. That is not normal. If you think that's normal, I need to remind you it's not normal. That's the result of a political project which this report is describing which this report is criticising. Let's go back to what it says. Life's essentials are now unaffordable for many. A grinding cost of living crisis is inseparable from the, quote, privatisation premium, where the public pays a double penalty to access basic services. First in the form of higher bills to fund corporate profits and shareholder rewards, and then again via their taxes to provide public subsidies that backstop private rewards. No wonder they're furious. Since the 1990s, almost £200 billion has been sent from bill payers to the shareholders of the private water, energy, Royal Mail and transport companies. £200 billion. Money that should have funded investment to improve services and reduce bills. The report concludes that this privatisation premium has averaged £250 per household per year since 2010 alone. Every single year. It's 2024, it's 2025, another £250. It's that time of the year. Pay up, pay pigs. Do your patriotic duty and pay the millionaire shareholders even more. TikTok. Time is money. What was that? You think it's unfair? Shut up. Your opinions are worthless. Give me my £250. Why are you so jealous of success? This is the politics of envy. Don't you know this system is the most intelligent device yet by humanity? We can't improve it. Ignore the nappies and E. coli in the water, my little pay pig. Ignore the late or often non-existent bus services and the high bills. Shut up and give me your privatisation premium. And shut up some more and pay higher taxes too to pay my subsidies. But besides that figure of an annual payment of £250 a year, here are some other astonishing numbers from that report. The report estimates that we pay £2 billion each year because of privatisation with regards to extra interest. Just the interest, £2 billion. Meanwhile, the average director of a privatised entity, that's a business which would have been in the public sector and now it's in the private sector, earns a salary of £1.5 million a year. That's last year. £1.5 million for these fake business gurus who often mismanage these entities. £1.5 million. That's 46 times the median salary. But don't you dare tax them more. Don't you dare. Otherwise they'll leave and go to Dubai. How do you expect these sectors to innovate and attract the best talent if you do? Don't you dare. Don't. Let's get that image back up. Bottom left is the fact that public wealth in Britain went from the highest in the G7, as you can see, prior to Thatcher, to among the lowest. Of course, the neoliberal revolution inverted precisely what it told people to do at the personal level. We were told, invest in your future, get a mortgage. It's a smart long-term move. Use debt now to build wealth going forward. It's what every grifting buy-to-let landlord thinks as well, right? Leverage finance. Finance is a tool to build long-term sustainable wealth. Meanwhile, when it came to the public realm, the exact same people said we should do the opposite. Sell it all. Invest in nothing. Basically, sell the clothes on your back and then rent them back. Sell your house to a new landlord and then rent it back from the landlord. What could go wrong? If somebody told you to do that in your personal life, you'd say, what on earth are you talking about? The situation isn't that bad. But it's been the modus operandi with regards to public services in this country my entire life. Regarding water bills, 26% of what you pay, according to this report, goes to paying dividends and financing debt. So you look at your water bill next time it comes, 26% of that is paying dividends to shareholders and financing debt. Meanwhile, no major reservoirs have been built in this country since privatisation. On energy, 21% of revenue goes towards dividends and interest payments. 21%. Pay up, pay pigs. The shareholders have holiday homes to pay for. Pay up. We need our premiums. Who cares if energy investment was over twice as high under public ownership as it was under privatisation? Shut up and gimme. It's 2026. I want my £250. Shut up. It's 2027. I want my £250 forever until you die. So what if shareholders of bus companies get dividends when 44% rather of the bus industry's income comes from, you guessed it, public money? That's right. You don't just pay for expensive bus tickets. Your taxes also subsidize the private companies charging you for the expensive tickets. See how it works? Basically, the British public is 68 million ATMs. That's how they look at us. You look at your national insurance number as a pay pig. These people look at each of our national insurance numbers as an ATM. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ATMs. Great. Give me my money. 250, 250, 250, 250. See you in 12 months' time, pay pigs. Gimme. So what if the cost of the average UK train fare is 3.4 times that of France? So what if the additional estimated cost of privatisation from 1997 to 2020 was £79 billion? Know your place. Pay up. £250, please. See you again next year. I don't care if over 1,000 nurseries in this country are owned by private equity groups, whose entire modus operandi, by the way, is buy an asset low, don't invest, pay people poorly, and sell high. That's how these organizations work. That's how private equity works. These are just children, my little pay pigs. Just kids. It's just the next generation. They don't matter like my kitchen extension in my third home. Pay up, gimme. And the £15 billion of local authority-owned land assets sold since 2010, you'd think would have made local authorities better off, except the precise opposite is true. It's almost as if selling off the assets that at one point belonged to you and I, the public, is part of a broader project of immiserating ordinary people. Pay up, pay pig. And finally, there's the Royal Mail. This report asserts that Royal Mail shares were undervalued by 27% when the company was flogged over a decade ago. Since then, there has been a 20% decline in next-day first-class delivery. You didn't really think the Royal Mail being privatised was better for service, did you, my little pay pigs? Really? How naive. This report is astonishing, not because it tells us anything new, it doesn't, but because it's compiled so much of the idiocy at the heart of the privatisation revolution. Worse services that are charging more, which still require taxpayer subsidies and have fake business bosses at the top earning millions. Stephen, some of those numbers are absolutely crazy. The idea that a quarter of your water bill is paying shareholder dividends and interest on debt. The debt, by the way, was used by people to buy the company in the first place. I feel that with this whole story, people that are going on a Tommy Robinson demo will be angry about it as well. And yet the failure of the Thatcherite revolution is kind of invisible right now in the wider political debate. Why is that?
Well, there's two reasons why it's invisible. The first one is that it's invisible because politicians from all parties, almost all of them, I'm going to exclude the Greens here, almost all of them are pointing at other things for people to focus on their anger on. Largely, at the moment, immigration, right? So that's one reason that it's invisible. But then you think, why are they doing that? Why are they, distracting us from the fundamental problem, which is that we're all being immiserated, sucked dry, squeezed by corporations and their shareholders? Why are they avoiding that? And the reason that they're avoiding that, Aaron, is because they don't know how to fix it. Nobody knows how to fix it. It's not as though, it's so embedded in our current thinking about economics as a country. It's so embedded in the way that we think about budgeting in terms of household budgets, for example, in the way that we think about value. I wanted to read you a quote, which I found so interesting, and it's from August earlier this year, and it's in the Telegraph, and it's from the Centre for Policy Studies. And I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm old and I need them to read this. And it followed a publication by Commonwealth of another report back then, where they said that the British state or British taxpayers had lost £194 billion as a result of the discount given by Thatcher to council house tenants who wanted to buy their homes. Now, this is from the Centre for Policy Studies, as I said, founded by Margaret Thatcher, that institution. And this is their understanding of value. So they say, social housing normally generates no profits at all. So its economic value to its owner, the taxpayers, is approximately zero. The so-called discount was not a discount from the actual value as council housing, but a discount from the hypothetical value it would have had if it were a market housing. Taxpayers only lost something they had already given away. So for me, that's a really striking way of thinking about economic value, because what it implies is that something's only valuable if it's generating a profit. So any other kinds of forms of value are completely discounted, including the asset value of the thing itself, because if it's not generating a profit, it has no asset value. According to that quote, Thatcher might as well have given council housing away. It would have made absolutely no difference to the taxpayer because it was non-profit generating. And in fact, a lot of it went to landlords. So now it is profit generating for them, not for the taxpayer, because now out of the taxpayer's hands. And of course, like, set aside the fact that council tenants do in fact pay some tax, some rent. But it's this crazy way of thinking of economically, which I think actually is embedded, as I say, throughout our political classes, throughout the ways in which we think about the relationship between the taxpayers and the state, where the role of the state is to lower the burden on the taxpayer. And in order to lower the burden on the taxpayer, it either has to have state assets that generate profit or it has to sell them off. But of course, what it then does is it raises other burdens on the taxpayer to a much, much higher level, not tax burdens, but this kind of privatisation premium that this report it talks about. So if you don't have a vision of public services where actually their economic value is not in generating receipts for the Chancellor directly, but rather in generating the kind of society in which people can live good lives, not giving half of their income to some private parasite who's got 10 houses, each one about to be repossessed if interest rates go up by 0.5%. A conception of value which is actually about the value that we have, voters, citizens, people living in this country, the value that our lives has. And as you put it, increasingly under this project of neoliberalism, our value is decreased to the point of, as you said, ATMs. We are simply sites of extraction. And that relentless extraction not only means that our own individual lives are immiserated, but our communal lives are immiserated because you can't afford to do anything anymore. And volunteering sounds impossible, for example, because you're working and you've got nothing at the end of it, and you don't feel particularly in the mood to give something away. Socializing, all these things that kind of bond us together, slowly evaporating as we become the things that the state treats us as via the corporations that they've sold us out to, individual atomized points of extraction. And nobody has any idea about how to fix this because they don't think it's actually an important issue. What they think about is rather the larger economic business of balancing the books. But balancing the books doesn't include us in it anywhere at all. It doesn't include our lives in it at all. We are a kind of fodder to these Thatcherite ideas of the books must be balanced constantly. Value is only profit making, even if the person profiting is the taxpayer. And that's it. That's the end of value. These are the real issues at the heart of this. And we have no politicians yet who have any idea about how to eliminate it, reverse it. And that is the source of all the political anger that you're seeing in the country at the moment. People's lives are getting worse. They know they're getting worse. The cost of living crisis has been an intense hit. And yes, it was sped up by these exogenous economic features of like the war in Ukraine and by the COVID pandemic, but it only sped it up. We are at the point where we would inevitably be a few years down the line had those things happened. And in fact, in a way, there's a kind of accelerationist view that says, maybe it's good they were sped up because maybe it will mean large-scale political changes in this country, which will mean we'll get people in. Doesn't look like it at the moment, but it's 2 years out to an election. Get people in who do have ideas about how to fix this extremely serious problem, the most serious problem in our country at the moment.
There's lots to think about here. What do the Tories stand for? I'm talking about the privatisation of the Royal Mail in 2013. We're talking about a national enterprise which has 500 years of history. Queen Elizabeth II was still alive at that point, head of state. I presume the Tories believe in the crown, right? If anything. So a 500-year-old enterprise, literally with a crown on it, the word royal in the name, they privatised it. And they privatise it, and it still lost money for the public. So you don't believe in tradition, you don't believe in history, you don't believe in principles of conservative authority. You don't believe in value for the public. What do you believe in? Fleecing people? Evidently, right? And then on that point about buses, 44% of the revenues that go into bus companies, 44%, as I mentioned before, is coming from the taxpayer. A couple of years ago, my mother-in-law would have to pay £4.50 to get from the north of the city where we live to the south, £4.50 with a bus fare. And that's with a subsidy of 44% coming from the taxpayer. So she's working, she used to be a seamstress, minimum wage job. She's working to subsidise these bus companies, and then she's paying, I think, probably the most expensive bus ticket prices in maybe Europe. By the way, buses and trains in this country are more expensive than Switzerland. Don't know if you've been to Switzerland, it's not a cheap country. And then finally, public debt. Isn't it crazy? Think about this. In the 1970s, nobody had debt. Nobody had debt. Nobody had debt. Credit cards barely existed. There was no student debt. Personal debt was very low. Sovereign debt was very low. There was loads of stuff that was publicly owned. So we had loads of assets, no debt. But apparently that was a disaster. We can never go back. That was a disaster. Then there was no debt. We had lots of assets. People were getting richer each year. Real wages were going up. Productivity was pretty good. That was a disaster. But now we're in a world where we've got 100% of public debt to GDP. Personal indebtedness is really high. The private sector has historically high levels of debt. Everybody's massively over-leveraged. We don't own anything as a country. Even the security for this country's military bases seems to be outsourced. Even the planes that the RAF used are being leased from private companies. And the crazy thing is, this is defended by the establishment as a sensible way to run a country. It's insane. And I think Stephen's right. You know, at some point, it's like defying political gravity. I know right now the conversation is on things like migration and race, and a lot of that's really ugly. And I'm not suggesting it's going to go away or get easier. But you can't avoid this stuff. At some point, whether it's the left or the right or God knows what, the topics isolated in this report will go center stage in the political debate in this country. They have to. Everybody's getting poorer. They have to. What do you think? Let me know. We've still got 2 more stories, so I'm going to maybe read a few of your comments. Super chat's always welcome. But if you want to do more than a super chat, if you want to support our work here at Novara Media, go to novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. Nobody else is doing this stuff, folks. Well, some people are. But we're pretty good, I think. We're doing a hell of a lot, and it's thanks to our incredibly generous supporters. We have what? I think 700,000 followers on Instagram now, 1 million subscribers here on YouTube. We are taking really important political conversations to a very broad audience. Help us do that by supporting our work. Go to novaramedia.com/support. The link for that is in the description below. Help us build people-powered media. 8 days ago, Kemi Badenoch said this.
What I'm doing is turning the Conservative Party into the traditional, authentic conservatism that people recognise. And that's going to mean taking some tough decisions. I'm afraid if people don't like it, then they are welcome to leave.
And yesterday, the first sitting Tory MP followed Kemi's instructions and switched to reform.
The Conservative Party is over. Over as a national party. Over as the principal opposition to the left. But I am not despondent, because conservatism is not over. It's never been needed more, and actually it's never been more vibrant. Because the failure of the Conservative Party has created space for an alternative.
Danny Kruger joins Andrea Jenkins, Nadine Dorries, Jake Berry, and many others as a former Conservative who's jumped ship. But his defection is being taken a little more seriously. That's because he is a sitting MP and was in fact a shadow minister until yesterday. He's also thought of as a relatively serious thinker by people on the right. Jack Rankin, Tory MP for Windsor, said this. So sad to read this. Danny isn't like the clowns they've accepted of late. That's reform. He's smart and wise and good. Whilst we share a similar analysis of the change the country needs, I disagree strongly about the vehicle with which to do so, but I respect his decision. Gutted. Ben Houchin is Tory mayor of Tees Valley. He said this: I like Danny. He's a good man, principled, clear in his convictions, a deep thinker, and not an MP that is driven by ego or self-promotion. Sad to see him leave. Danny Kruger describes himself as a communitarian. He's also a socially conservative evangelical Christian. So his defection potentially strengthens the evangelical flavour of Britain's populist right. It also further weakens the authority of Kemi Badenoch as Tory leader, though she's found a silver lining.
Danny has made his case very clear that this is not about me. I can't be distracted by that, and I'm not going to get blown off course by these sorts of incidents. I know that this is the sort of thing that is going to happen while a party is changing.
This is the kind of thing that will happen while a party is changing. It's changing. Kemi, it's changing. The problem is it's changing for the worse. Have you seen your poll ratings recently? We're changing. Yeah, you're projected to get 50 seats at the next general election. Now, that was Kemi Badenoch simply exuding charisma and authority. And she pleaded that none of this was about her while standing in a literal pigsty. All very bizarre. Let's move on. Stephen. Kruger, I think, is a significant figure, isn't he? He's a former speechwriter to David Cameron, political secretary for Boris Johnson, a quite close ally, it's fair to say, of Robert Jenrick. If he's leaving the party, that indicates a few things, namely that Robert Jenrick might not win if Kemi goes. That surprised me because I thought there would be something of a contest and he would be a variable. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
I think it does say so. I mean, look, let's start with Danny Kruger's own seat. So his seat in East Wiltshire, he won it with like a 5,000 vote majority the last election. By February, that had been cut to a projected 2,000. And in the more recent polling, he's got a 1 in 3 chance of winning, and Reform has a 2 in 3 chance of winning. So there might be some self-serving, I want to stay on as an MP, it's a cushy life going on here. On the Jenrick point, I think he is right that I mean, I think that's a good hypothesis that he's switching over to Reform because he doesn't think the Tories can be taken in a direction that Jenrick would take them in if he won, and that's because he thinks Jenrick can't win it. And I think there's something to that, and I think there's actually maybe something like politically sensible about that, because what's making Reform look attractive to some Tories, some high-profile Tories. We saw Maria Caulfield go today as well, former health minister, no longer an MP though. What's making it look attractive is that Nigel Farage is positioning it away from the kind of base building that he did before he became an MP, and even briefly after, when he first took over Reform, of sort of appealing to a lot of people who were very, very passionate about, things like remigration or mass deportation. And he's sort of settled on a position now where he's saying, okay, we'll have 600,000 deportations in our first parliament. That sounds like a huge number, but it's not nearly enough for a lot of the people that he was talking to before or trying to appeal to before. And he's slowly having to move over because he knows that to get into government, he can't just appeal to the people. I'm not saying the whole march in London on Saturday involved the kinds of people he was appealing to before, but I'm saying, a fair chunk will have done. He knows that he can't do a policy pitch that is going to appeal to those people and win government, because the country is vast and most British people don't hold anything like any kind of views like that. But plenty of people who will be concerned about migration, and perhaps the 600,000 figure is what he thinks of as a reasonable figure to be able to attract those people while clinging on to as many of the others as possible, and potentially knowing full well that he won't be able to achieve that very easily without transforming the whole state. So having moved himself more towards the centre, he starts to look as like a more appealing prospect for Tories who can see that the party is not going to try and battle him on that kind of ground, that the party might swing away from migration as its topic and battle on another ground, or become completely irrelevant, which it pretty much is at the moment. But they become even more irrelevant, become dead, as Kruger said in that piece. And I think there is a chance of the Tory party dying. I mean, I think if I were in charge of Tory strategy, I would be saying something like, look, Reform has pitched a 600,000 deportation number. We know that's not possible because we couldn't even send anyone, like people to Rwanda on our crazy scheme. Let's pitch a more reasonable migration figure, for example, something about the boats or something about making visas harder. And let's just bang on tax. Let's just talk about tax. It's the economy, stupid. Let's make that the thing. Now, that's not going to get the kind of headlines that the kind of migration stuff at the moment will, but it will appeal to a lot of people who won't be trusting Farage on the economy. And I think that would be the canny thing for them to do. I think people like Kruger may have jumped too soon because it may be that, there could be a leadership election. Badenoch may go. She may get better advisors. We're still quite a long way out of an election. And Reform is still a party that's in the middle of its kind of creation. So anything can happen in Reform. And as we see, there are a lot of people who turned out in those protests on Saturday, a lot of people online who didn't turn out to those protests, the Tommy Robinson protests on Saturday, who are very, very angry with Farage and losing interest in him as a political figure. So yeah, I think there's still, I think the Tories, there's a good chance that they're dead, but I think that there are pathways for them to revive themselves. But it means giving up on the kind of culture wars or wars over migration that they are so practiced at doing now, that's become such a lazy kind of placeholder for policies. And if they started actually developing policies, and they actually started talking about the economy, which Tories are usually quite good at doing, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, their fortunes might change, and Kruger may still regret this move to Reform.
Yeah, it's a really strange one. This is such a strange story for me. I mean, Kruger's going because he thinks generic, Bobby Ozempic, doesn't have a chance of winning, seemingly, which would indicate that James Cleverly will. But if you're a centrist, I'm not suggesting that people backing James Cleverly are all of this, but if you're a centrist, pro-business, vaguely pro-EU, because of course many of them were, but you accept Brexit, why wouldn't you just join the Lib Dems? I mean, before 2024, I would have said, why don't you just join Keir Starmer's Labour Party? But now I would just say, why don't you just join the Lib Dems? What's going to differentiate James Cleverly from the Lib Dems? And I think you're right, Stephen, it's going to be low tax. There's not much fat to cut when it comes to the British state anymore, I'm afraid, unless you do things like get rid of the triple lock. Which, yeah, if you index the pensions, public pensions in this country to wage or inflation, you're probably going to save a couple of billion a year, sure. But look at what just happened to Labour with regards to removing the winter fuel allowance. And by the way, before we go to our final story, that target announced by Reform of deporting 600,000 people will require leaving the ECHR. It will require getting rid of the Supreme Court, or at least passing acts of parliament which mean the Supreme Court is impotent on matters pertaining to this stuff. It will mean Farage having to create probably about 700-800 new lords. This would be the single biggest constitutional rupture this country had seen since the Glorious Revolution. And Nigel Farage is going to do it. Richard Tice is going to do it. That's not to denigrate them. This stuff is really hard. This stuff is really hard. It would be a bigger constitutional revolution than Lloyd George did, right? And I think a lot of their supporters don't realize how big the shifts would have to be to make that doable, that 600,000 target doable. Now, I know many people watching this, or, people on the right say, well, it needs to be more than that. It's the exact same with Brexit, right? Brexit could have been a quote-unquote success if you didn't want to do everything all at once. Even if you want to leave the single market, you want to do X, Y, Z, fine. It's going to take you 10 years, just accept it. But no, we have to do everything all at once, and it's been a real problem. It's like saying, you know what, I want to lose weight and get my skin to look great, and I want, eyebrows to look great, and I'm going to get Botox and filler and do this and that. I'm going to get a PhD, and I'm going to learn a foreign language, and I'm going to learn the piano. Self-improvement, you might not think it's self-improvement, I'm sort of, dragging this out by talking about cosmetic surgery. Chill out. Maybe, I don't know, go have a facial, right? Start somewhere. No, we're going to do everything. Everything all at once. Very strange. I think the immediacy comes from social media, right? Everything now, all at once. Actually, politically, if you ever want to accomplish something, it takes a really long time. Both before you've got power and after. Look at Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher is the most transformative politician in this country's post-war history. In 1979, she introduces new taxes. She doesn't do anything crazy. She doesn't go all in on taking on organised labour, on privatising things until she's won a second time in 1983. That's how successful politicians operate. I say that as somebody who's not a big fan of Thatcher's project, believe it or not. Keir Starmer's appointment of Blair-era grandee Peter Mandelson, the post of US ambassador, despite his close ties to the deceased paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein, is still creating major fallout for the beleaguered PM. Mandelson was sacked on Friday after more information about his friendship with Epstein came to light. Last Monday, Democrats in Congress released the infamous 50th birthday book, which included cutesy messages written by Mandelson calling Epstein no less than his best pal. And nevertheless, Starmer's spokesperson said he was still backing Mandelson. By Wednesday, Bloomberg had released a cache of emails between Mandelson and Epstein. They included Mandelson's apparent outrage at Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting sex from a child. This is what Mandelson said to Epstein the day before the notorious billionaire paedophile's 13-month jail term began. "I think the world of you, and I feel hopeless and furious about what has happened. I can still barely understand it. It just could not happen in Britain. You have to be incredibly resilient, fight for early release, and be philosophical about it as much as you can. The whole thing has been years of torture, and now you have to show the world how big a person you are and how strong. Your friends stay with you and love you." This is a man, Jeffrey Epstein, who, by the way, was molesting children as young as 14. Your friends love you. On the same day, Keir Starmer went to PMQs and said this.
"The ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship."
2 days later, though, Mandelson got the boot. Yesterday, Keir Starmer admitted to knowing that emails existed between Mandelson and Epstein and that a Foreign Office inquiry into them was taking place. But Starmer says he did not know and did not ask about their content. Now, if you're finding the timeline a little hard to follow, don't worry. In an emergency House of Commons debate today, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch had plenty of questions too.
But we now know that the Prime Minister was aware of the compromising emails last Wednesday at Prime Minister's questions, and yet he came to the House and said that he had confidence in his ambassador, and many of them cheered. Now they're all looking at their phones. Most of them don't have the courage to look me in the eye. They were cheering last week. Now they're full of shame. Why on earth did he do that? At any point, did he ask his staff, oh, sorry, are they proud? Are they proud? No. I'll continue. At any point, did he ask his staff what more information might surface? Because that morning, Lord Mandelson was saying more information would surface. Did he receive a briefing about this ahead of Prime Minister's questions? It is inconceivable that he did not. Inconceivable. Ministers are now claiming that new information subsequently came to light, new information that they didn't have. The story is all mixed and messed up, and they know it. What information appeared that was not in the original vetting? We'd like to hear that when the Minister gives his statement. And there are still more questions to answer. When did the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff speak with Peter Mandelson last week, and what did he discuss with him? Do they have the courage to tell us that? We are told that Morgan McSweeney spent hours on the phone to the ambassador, hours on the phone, at the same time that Lord Mandelson was dodging calls from the Foreign Office. What were they talking about?
What were they talking about? It's a good question. Potential leadership challenger to Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, twisted the knife about the scrutiny, or lack thereof, of Mandelson's appointment. Here's what she had to say.
My committee first asked for the opportunity to question Lord Mandelson at the end of last year, when rumours first surfaced of his appointment as ambassador to the United States. And we continued to ask after his appointment was confirmed. Indeed, the Minister may remember our exchange on the 14th of January in this chamber, when I asked him to allow Lord Mandelson the time to come before my committee before he leaves for the United States, to allow my colleagues to hear directly why the Prime Minister has appointed him. These requests were made more often and privately after that and in the 8 months since, and they have been turned down. I understand that we've had a little bit of Chinese whispers going on because I understand that it's claimed that the Foreign Office has been telling journalists that we had the opportunity to meet and question Lord Mandelson when we were in Washington. Now, obviously, there's been a break in that chain because the reality is, of course, that we had a 15-minute interaction over breakfast while receiving a formal briefing from the diplomatic staff about other meetings that we were having that day. Obviously, quite materially different to the type of formal evidence session required to conduct meaningful scrutiny.
Emily Thornberry continued with this.
The Foreign Secretary's letter states that Cabinet Office due diligence was followed by the usual developed vetting, or DV process, carried out by National Security Vetting on behalf of the FCDO after the announcement of Lord Mandelson's appointment. This was, the Foreign Secretary says, conducted to the usual standard set of developed vetting. Now, career civil servants are regularly subject to such tests, and many have stories of their appointments being delayed or even prohibited because they've studied abroad, because they've married an Iranian, or because they were simply born in Belfast. So the question is this: does having significant information in the public domain about your relationship with an internationally prolific child sex offender not raise more red flags than simply being born in Belfast? Is a civil servant a greater risk to this country because they are married to somebody who was born in the Middle East, or because they were close friends with Jeffrey Epstein? Did the Foreign Office vetting process miss a glaring national security and reputational risk, or was it told to overlook it?
It's notable that Starmer himself skipped the emergency debate. It's almost as if he's a coward. He can't face the music. Instead, sending out Foreign Office Minister for North America, Stephen Doughty, to feel the ire of MPs on his behalf. And perhaps the most powerful and angry speech in the Commons today was delivered by SNP MP Stephen Flynn. Take a listen.
But the greatest scandal of all is the fact that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom appointed a man to that role, knowing that that man had maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, despite the fact that Jeffrey Epstein had been convicted in 2008 in Florida. Convicted for having 14-year-old girls masturbate him. And the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom thought it was fitting for the best friend of that individual to hold the highest diplomatic office in the United States of America on behalf of the people of these Isles. What a complete disgrace. And the only thing that seems to have caused any consternation for the Prime Minister in any of this is not that that happened, but the fact that for a short period, Peter Mandelson appeared to think Jeffrey Epstein was innocent. Which draws us to the conclusion that if Peter Mandelson had thought that Jeffrey Epstein had maintained the friendship but thought he was guilty, he would still be in post. What has happened to the moral compass of this place, of the office of Prime Minister, where we can simply accept a rationale such as that? How can any victim of child sex abuse in these Isles or elsewhere have confidence in the structures that we put in place when the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the Minister shakes his head? Is there an intervention that he wants to make? Is there something that he disagrees with in that assessment of those facts? Or does he want to present the additional detail to this House which makes any of that untrue whatsoever? No. I notice he's not shaking his head now, but I tell you who is shaking their head: the public at him and his Prime Minister for the decisions that they have taken.
I think this is really important to say. Peter Mandelson remained very close friends with a man who molested a 14-year-old girl. Now, in politics, people attack the other side, don't they? And there can even be hyperbole about what somebody has done. And there can be an argument about whether or not, the response is justified. That person shouldn't have had to resign. That thing they did was 20 years ago. It wasn't even that bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 99.999% recurring of the country finds that viscerally disgusting. And we knew all of this about Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson. We knew all of it. And the Prime Minister made him the ambassador to the United States. And by the way, that wasn't even a job that just, came up. They got rid of somebody who was very highly respected in Washington, Karen Pierce. Very highly respected. Sorry, you have to go for somebody who, by the way, now we know, in his own words, the best pal of the world's most infamous paedophile. It defies belief. This is way worse than anything Boris Johnson did. Way, way, way worse. Way worse. The Chris Pincher thing. Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. Awful. Awful. Of course it's awful. But giving the best friend of the world's most infamous paedophile such a senior job to represent this country on the global stage with the world's most powerful country, I mean, of course it's worse. And it's something I've thought about with Labour people I meet. Lots of Labour people right now, councillors, activists, whatever, are kind of ashamed of the party, right? Understandably. But they reassure themselves that, well, we can do good things in power, or maybe Starmer won't be there forever, or whatever. It must be really hard. I mean, this is just despicable. Let's just be quite frank. This is despicable. This is one of the worst things that I think any Labour politician has done since Blair. By the way, would Blair have done this? I don't think he would have. It's despicable. And the idea that the person overseeing it was the exact same guy saying he would return integrity to public office. Words don't mean anything anymore, do they? And I'm not saying this because I dislike Keir Starmer or I don't like Labour or whatever. You can't have people who are defending men that molest 14-year-old girls in public life. You can't have it. This is crazy. This is crazy. What did they think was going to happen? One Labour MP, though, John Slinger, completely misread the mood.
Frankly, this is a welcome change, and no matter how uncomfortable recent events have been, we are seeing, under this Prime Minister, that public officials, ministers, and yes, ambassadors are being held to higher standards than previously, and I welcome that.
So, Peter Mandelson was made this country's ambassador to the United States, and because he's now had to resign because he's such a moron, and he's having to resign not because of what this government's done or what the country's media has done, but because there was a subpoena on the estate of Jeffrey Epstein by congressional Democrats. That's the only reason why any of this is happening, by the way. When we have high standards. So after making the friend of the world's most infamous paedophile, the ambassador to the United States, now you're getting rid of him after loads of stuff comes to light. And if you think I'm being unfair, look at my ex, look at my Twitter. For years, he would go on LBC, Times Radio, Peter Mandelson, and I would tweet at people saying, this is crazy. Ask him about Epstein. Ask him about Epstein. Nothing. We had Rivka Brown at Labour Party conference asking him. He sort of pushed to one side. I asked him as well, actually. We have a video of me asking Peter Mandelson about Jeffrey Epstein. We've not published it because I'm very forthright with him. Mandelson was given a podcast. He was part of a podcast series, How to Win an Election on Times Radio. You've got Emily Maitlis saying that powerful men like this shouldn't be in public life. There's obviously that very infamous picture of her being friendly with Peter Mandelson at an event. But now we're really coming down hard on them, folks. We're coming down really hard on them. This is a guy, by the way, who resigned twice from cabinet. Twice. This stuff happens with Peter Mandelson. Stephen, saying it's a nadir is a touch over the top because, of course, this country is enabling a genocide. We got involved in a war with Iraq. But in terms of a personal human story, it is one of those which kind of just defies belief. Like what was Morgan McSweeney, what was Keir Starmer thinking when they made this choice?
I mean, Peter Kyle, business secretary, was on Sky over the weekend, and he said, look, a trade was made in terms of risk. We knew there would be some risk, but we thought this guy is so clever and so gifted at political brinkmanship that we'll take the risks and we'll give him the job. Now, of course, he was denying the extent of the risk that they knew. He was denying that they knew anything about these other emails that were released by Bloomberg. I mean, I just find that hard to believe. I think the thing that Thornberry said about, you're really telling me that the vetting for an ambassador is less than the vetting for a senior civil servant who will be denied a job on the basis of who they're married to or where they're born, or that. Yeah, I just don't believe that. I don't believe, and I think that the trouble for Starmer is that nobody believes it, and for sure there is some journalist out there somewhere who's got more, and he or she is just waiting for the right moment to release it. And so I think Peter Kyle there does give us a sense of what they were thinking. They were thinking, we want a certain kind of relationship with the US that matters most to us. The very reliable ambassador that we have at the moment isn't going to be able to do what magical PT can do with Trump. God knows why they thought that. I mean, the only thing that I ever think is that, well, maybe they thought, perhaps not incorrectly, that Peter Mandelson knew things that he could hold over Trump, and the presence of him in Washington would be some kind of conciliatory device in terms of a relationship with Trump. That's the only reason that I can think of for why they would have given that man that job, given his reputation. And the thing you say about the way that somehow Mandelson has managed to maintain a position in the kind of political and media elite, despite being busy mates with, as Thornberry said, a prolific perpetrator of child sex crimes, is beyond question. It gives. I know Peter Mandelson himself has not been accused of anything, and we are not accusing him, but it gives kind of strange Jimmy Savile vibes. Not that I'm saying Mandelson is like Jimmy Savile, but just the same way in which there was someone who was able to occupy a kind of media space in the UK, despite committing the crimes. Now we have someone who is able to occupy a similar sort of space, even a higher space, ambassador, despite being friends with someone who was worse than Jimmy Savile by all accounts. Really, really shocking stuff. And a very good indication of that is something that we played on the show last night, and I don't know if you've seen it, Aaron, which is Trevor Phillips, former Labour person, journalist, now Sky, etc., who Mandelson was his best man at his wedding in 1981, but that was a very long time ago. But Trevor Phillips has remained extremely close friends with Mandelson throughout all of this, and he was asked on Sky, on Times Radio, did you ever ask him about his relationship with Epstein? And this journalist, very highly admired, esteemed journalist, just said, no, I never did. I belong to a different circle of friends. And that is bullshit. And that is so much about how the media thinks when it comes to these powerful politicians, about how not to hold them to account. Of course, Trevor Phillips must have thought, what's going on here? Of course, Emily Maitlis must have thought, what's the story? All these people who move in his circle and who are journalists have not asked him those questions precisely because the value of the relationship to them is so much greater than getting the truth out. Just as the value of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US was so much greater for Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney than being at all morally perturbed by the fact that he remained friends with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been convicted for trafficking sex from paying for sex with a 14-year-old girl, for acts that I'm really glad that were put in such graphic terms in the House of Commons, because I think it's actually really useful for people to know what that involves.
It's right coded, isn't it? People like Tommy Robinson go around screaming at people that they're paedophiles or their friends are paedophiles. Peter Mandelson's literally best friends with the world's most infamous paedophile. I mean, I don't know what else to say. You had that video as well, didn't you, of Wes Streeting over the weekend? I think it was over the weekend. Or maybe it was last week, where this was all raised and he said, well, of course, my thoughts go out to the women, the survivors. They're, center stage here. Of course, many of these people were children when it happened. And some of them aren't with us anymore. Virginia Giuffre is dead. right? This is serious business. And I think you're right. This isn't just stuff, by the way, that I think journalists should be talking to Mandelson about. Surely Trevor Phillips is the kind of thing you have a few drinks and you start talking to a very close friend about it, right? When these stories come up, I mean, Epstein was literally everywhere. Or pillow talk with your wife, or your girlfriend, or your husband. You're friends with that guy, best man at a wedding. Do you think it's true? Those conversations absolutely happen. Of course they do. Of course they do. And with Mandelson, this guy set up a lobbying company, Global Council, in 2010. He was lobbying for TikTok in Europe. By the way, I'm not a big fan of the whole China business scare that's peddled by Western politicians, but he was. He was lobbying for the interests of Chinese companies in Europe and the United States. He was best friends with one of the world's most infamous pedophiles. He's involved in 2 scandals where he has to resign from cabinet when New Labour is in government. You read all that, I don't even know how he's a Lord, quite frankly. Lots of people get rejected from the House of Lords for far less than that, let alone being a Lord and the ambassador to the United States. Really strange. Lord Yum Yum, as he'll now be called. Thanks for tonight, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Good to see you.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.